and of course forms that coalition with the Liberal Democrat leader, Nick Clegg. And what was clear was that it was a coalition that suited Cameron, because he wasn't a Conservative anyway. There's almost nothing about David Cameron that's even vaguely Conservative, economically, socially, or anything else. And it was from 2010 that UKIP grew in the polls. You know, one day it was 3%. And then a few weeks later, it was 4%. And a few months later, it was 5%. And we kept growing and growing and growing. And I was leading the party. I was spending hardly any time in London whatsoever. I was out round the country. I was out in the street markets. I was doing public events in town halls. I was making a noise with local media. I had a following building on YouTube and many other things, an appetite for what I was saying, what I was doing. And we had a Conservative government, a Conservative-led government that were pushing on with European integration, effectively. We're pushing on by allowing China to buy into our nuclear industry, to become, as they saw it, our key, economic and strategic partner going forward. We had a Conservative government compulsorily purchasing land and putting up wind turbines all over the country. A Conservative government who, without a manifesto pledge to do so, completely redefined what marriage had stood for centuries and centuries and centuries. And a Conservative government who point blank refused, when it came to the proposition that we ought to have a vote on whether to stay part of what was an increasingly political union. So, in a sense, as leader of UKIP, I kind of had two things going for me. One, energy, enthusiasm, and exuberance that were probably unrealistic in terms of where the party was, but I just believed in it and I wanted to be proved right. But secondly, a Conservative leader who was flat-footed, tone deaf when it came to his own voters. So we just grew and grew and grew. And in 2013, we got to a point where Cameron then wanted to commit the Conservative-led government to getting involved in the war in Syria. And once again, a massive miscalculation with Middle England and everybody else. And it was in the elections of that year, in the local elections of that year, that suddenly UKIP got 25% of the vote in England. And we then went on to 2014, where we won the European elections nationally. And the real reason that in the end Cameron offered the referendum was this. Yes, he was terrified of the number of votes we were taking from him. But what really scared him were the people we'd started to take from the Conservative Party. And I'm talking about people, who'd been branch chairman in Tory associations for years. I'm talking about, up to 20 former Conservative members of Parliament who were joining UKIP because they thought this issue actually matters more than their bond and their tie to the party. But what he really feared were a mass wave of defections taking place in the House of Commons. Now, they did happen because Douglas Carswell, began the process. Mark Reckless followed. They resigned as members of Parliament for the Conservatives. And on points of principle, unlike almost anybody else in modern times, they submitted themselves to by-elections. I mean, fancy that, honour in politics. I mean, it's a most unusual commodity. And of course, they both resigned, both stood as UKIP, both won their seats. So Cameron was terrified. Cameron thought there'd be a wave of mass defections, and a little bit of intrigue here, which you might enjoy. Stuart Wheeler, the guy that invented spread betting, and Stuart, after being the biggest donor in Tory party history, joined UKIP, became my treasurer, and there were lots of gossip columns in the London Evening Standard and elsewhere saying that Stuart Wheeler had been seen in a lunchtime restaurant drinking wine with a sitting Tory MP, you see. And this all led to this fear in David Cameron of mass defection. So I had a chat with Stuart about it, and we decided that he should dine as regularly as possible, as prominently as possible, in the best known haunts in the West End of London, with as many Conservative members of Parliament who would accept the invitation, just to kind of put the threat level. And I think looking back on it, the truth of it is that, yeah, there were a number of Tory MPs who thought this whole issue mattered so much that they might jump. But I think Stuart's lunching arrangements led them to feel that it might be a tsunami. So what Cameron then did was to say, right, we're going to box this dreadful bloke Farage. We're going to box him off. We're going to shoot the UKIP fox. And you shoot the UKIP fox by saying there will be a referendum. If we get a majority at the next election, there will be a referendum. And David Cameron believed that once he'd said that, I would cease to be relevant. I would disappear, the threat would go away. Because all he did was to legitimize the very thing that I'd been saying for the previous 20 years. So that's kind of how this all came. He'd founded something called the Anti-Federalist League. He's an historian, and I think he sort of thought about the Anti-Corn Law League back in the 1840s, which in many ways is a very similar campaign, actually, to the Eurosceptic campaign. And Alan was an historian, and I think had a sort of romanticism about the Anti-Corn Law League, who indeed were one of the most successful single pressure groups kind of the world's ever seen. But there were a group of us who persuaded him that the use of the word anti had modern connotations that just did not work, and that we had, in the wake of Maastricht being ratified, to become a political party. And in the end, he was persuaded of that. What was it like? Should we say, a band of glorious amateurs. Quite a lot of people with good academic degrees, with good brains, but hardly anyone that knew how to boil an egg. So lots of debate, lots of ideas, lots of interesting chatter, but when it came to actually running election campaigns, when it came to nuts and bolts organization, when it came to doing stuff on the ground, I mean, they were pretty hopeless, if I'm really honest about it. And part of the task from September 93 until June 99, when 3 of us got elected to the European Parliament, the biggest battle wasn't going out onto the street and having conversations with people, because actually people were quite keen to learn more, to understand more. The biggest battle in politics is often within your own party and not against the others. But we kind of, from 97 to 99, I was lucky in that we had a retired RAF squadron leader called David Lott, who actually could organize things, who actually could set up an office, give instructions to people, get things delivered through doors and make things happen. And so I worked with David, and in many ways, when I look back at all the highs and lows of 27, 28 years of doing this, in a sense, three of us getting elected to the European Parliament in 1999, that was almost the single most significant moment in all of this, because we had elected representation. Suddenly, a view was appearing on the BBC's Question Time, and bear in mind, there was no internet in these days. You know, we had to rely completely on mainstream media to appear, to make our messages, to put the arguments out. And it was from that moment in 1999 that we were able to start pushing an argument that really had died with the referendum back in 1975. You know, there was a campaign in 75 to leave the European Economic Community, but once that lost, that voice was almost not heard again in British politics for all those years.
We will make America great again.